with reference to Akhenaten, can you talk to us about the dark side of the sun?
Yeah, well, see, everybody in the world, almost 9 out of 10 scholars believe that Akhenaten was a proto-Christ. If they don't go that far, they'll certainly say he was the proto-monotheist. Nothing could be further from the truth. Monotheism was centuries and centuries and centuries before Akhenaten ever come about. And what he had in his Aton worship is just a hybridized form of solar worship. That's why he came into conflict with the Theban group, Ammonists. Now, Ammonists, I'm the one to show that Ammonists were Druids in Egypt. So today when people, Ammonist, Atonist, Ammonist, Atonist, half the scholars are more, almost 100% of the scholars have no idea of the Irish connection to Egypt. The Ammonists are one with the Druids of Ireland and the West. They're the same group. They have the same tutelary symbols and the same behavior. Everybody knows the Druids love the number 3. There's nothing in Ammonism that isn't a triad. Even their mother, father, and son, God pantheons are all triads that you later get hybridized in Christianity as the Trinity. The Trinity is one of the oldest motifs that anyone could ever want. Like we're saying, trace it all back, right? So Akhenaten's solar worship is nothing new. And then as I studied further, my whole approach is that it's not solar worship at all. Because you had solar worship in Egypt and in India. What do you think Hinduism is? What do you think Brahmanism is? So there's something really odd with this. And so after years of researching this, I discovered that really the whole thing is a hoax. And what you have here is not a solar cult, which wouldn't be anything really unnecessarily bad, because as I say, you've had centuries of solar cults in Egypt and the world. No, there's something distinctive about Akhenaten's cult, and that's all fake. You know, being a little dramatic here about it, but the idea is that the solar worship, which has fooled all the writers, it's not monotheism, it's a veil of light to hide a far more darker form of worship. And just for convenience, I call it the dark side of the sun, because you don't want to be using terms like Lucifer and all, because as I told you, once you understand what Lucifer really is, it doesn't really have that direct connection that Christians and others think. You're just misleading yourself and everybody else. So you have to come up with something else. So then as further studies went on, and you start to get this fact that there were private forms of worship amongst the aristocracy of Egypt, and that they had a whole slew of private pantheon that the public didn't even know about, maybe a little bit, but not too much. Private forms of worship. It's been done for centuries. Even in Rome and Greece, this was the case. And it was very rare that the names of those gods were even known. And one of the most important ones was Set worship, which we now know later, through misinformation as Saturn worship. And this Set worship has been going on since a very, very long time, maybe from the comet. The destructiveness of the comet, the awesomeness of the comet, and the various other psychological effects of observing the comet as it passed at least twice around the Earth, and the destruction of it, caused a black priesthood of Set to arise. And that's, to me, what Akhenaten really was about. But they realized that because of this love of private worship, they wanted to conceal it. So the difference here is that the priests of Heliopolis and other groups related, Akhenaten grew up amongst those priests. So when you read about Joseph marrying the daughter of the priest of Heliopolis, Joseph of the Bible gets to Egypt. Remember, he's sent there, the guy with a coat of many colors and all this. He becomes advisor to Pharaoh, but he marries a woman, a girl who is, I think her name is Asenath. Don't quote me on that. And she is the daughter of the priest of Heliopolis. Ding! Finally, the mythmongers are telling you something you can use here, meaning that Joseph becomes a priest. He's in the family of the priesthood of the temple of Giza, of the temple of the sun kings, the sun priests of Heliopolis. Do you realize what you're being told there? And then when you find out that these guys don't really worship the sun, or at least not in any sense that we would understand today. On the outside, exoterically, they worship the sun, but the secret worship. And then you find out later that Akhenaten is also studied there and came from there, is related to the priest of Heliopolis, who had a great antipathy to the Ammonists further down the Nile. Pieces start to fall into place. But the biggest piece of all is that this kind of solar worship was a front for a very different kind of worship. And that's what my books explore. And basically, it's a kind of Set worship. And that takes you into then who is Set? Well, the Israelites worshipped him as El Shaddai. Shad being a most extraordinary term. And then I get into that in the Female Illuminati, Article 3. Jews and Templars, the untold story. And you better believe it's an untold story. It's incredible when you get into it. But the observing of the heavens, which is astrotheology, might have happened through trauma, because we looked up because suddenly this frightful serpent in the sky appeared and devastated the earth. Or, it might be something even more antique. Gerald Massey and Albert Churchward, they tend to think it's extremely ancient. Before any sort of cataclysms in the heavens, man looked up to the wonder of the stars. And that makes sense, doesn't it? Because even sun worship, wherever you find it, is based on wonder, awe, and amazement. We look up to the sun, the whole world, not just priests. Think of the men along the banks of the Ganges, the Brahmins, the Hindus. Think of the Native American Indians. Think of, the symbol of the Egyptians when they're raising, and Christians do that to this day in their mega churches. Of course, the sun is a symbol of wonder and astonishment and will be worshipped along those lines. But so is the heavens. So is the night sky. Some great scholar said, if the stars came out but once a year overhead, the streets would be flooded with people. Everybody would pour forth out of their houses to gaze upward in amazement. But because they come out every evening, oh, what the hell? So what? We've lost our amazement. We've lost that wonder. But ancient man didn't. He was closer to nature than ever. The stars were not just something, generic there. Most teenagers today, kids, they don't even care to look up. They don't even have any sense of wonder at all. Astrotheology, solar worship, all kinds of ancient pagan worship were based in wonder, based in awe, and of course fear and anxiety and trepidation. And we do know that because of the coming of the comet, then unfortunately those emotions, they became exaggerated, and so religion and fear. And this is where your Satan comes from. This is where all of that comes from, the childhood fears of the dark and of dark places and all that. But Satan is Set. And so Set worship existed just as pure Set worship. And the mother of Set, they had a whole pantheon, when you get into it, Apophis, Peppa was sort of the mother serpent. Because remember, now that you've got this figure in the pantheon, you've got to explain its origins. So Set worship has innumerable interpretations, first he was a giraffe. In the earliest times, they made him like some sort of giraffe. Then, they blended it with other, they don't know if a symbol of Set is an anteater or some kind of dog or wolf. This happens. And because a lot of the hieroglyphics were lost, and a lot of the parchments are all burned and ruined, we don't really know too much about it. But we do have the word, Satan, Seth. It turns up in the Bible as the son of Adam and Eve, and other iterations. But there was so many apocryphal works that would have told us all the story of it, but they were all burned on purpose by Constantine and his legions. So we can only piece things together. It's very long story. But I believe, and I'm the only one who ever advocates this, is that some kinds of solar worship were a nice facade behind which a much darker and fiendish, bizarre private worship was undergone, and that might have even married in with some even other weirder things. And so when you're watching Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and certain films that come out, you're getting little anecdotes there from people who are members of this cult. These cults did not die out. And these cults therefore have very, very, very famous, not famous, but very wealthy members, top politicians, top aristocracy. And then they leak some of their own history amazingly. Da Vinci Code is no different, but there's so many other films. And they appear as these great Hollywood extravaganzas, but in it is secretly secreted into these film scripts or gems that teach you about things. But you don't even need the films. Just go out, look up at the clouds, and why do you see faces in the clouds? I can't remember the technical term for that, but when you look up and you see dragons and faces, and where did that come from? Where did the idea that a child will go, "Mommy, I see a big bear or a big bull or a big serpent in the clouds"? Does anybody even ask a simple question of where that came from and why? And if you did, it would lead you into the most extraordinary and brilliant insights about once in our history where we all looked up in a state of such unspeakable fright when these great heavenly bodies, came into conjunction. I talk about that in Article 6. Or when a comet tore up the heavens, and you get this in the book of Job, and you get it in the book of Revelation. It's all there in the Bible, these explanations. When like for instance, in the Old Testament, when they say the cloud of God followed the holy people through the wilderness, or the great tabernacle was erected, and then the cloud, God appeared in the whirlwind, and the cloud of God came down, and the firmament opened, and all the rest of it. It's all there. But what we're talking about here are the underlying keys of decipherment to all of those anecdotes, and the wrath of the Lord, and the parting of the waves, and the great wrathfulness of God that you see on the mount. But as I said, don't ever underestimate the sexual connotations of these cults as well. That's a very antique form of worship. So there's a lot going on. That religion today is a very, very diluted version of what we had in the past. And these priesthoods, unfortunately, especially the Setian Atnast one, is very foul, and is hell-bent on control of the mind, control of the libido, and control of the world.